Mr. Speaker, the Multinational Enterprise Minimum Tax Bill will put into legislative force the terms associated with the second pillar of the OECD's BEPS Treaty. Given that Singapore has been a signatory of the original convention since mid-2017, and 4 years thence having signed on to the second phase, this is essentially a ratification of our pre-existing international commitments. Moreover, the stipulations give effect to a corporate minimum tax that, absent action on our part, as Minister Indrani has shared, would simply afford other jurisdictions the opportunity to apply a top-up tax if our effective rates were to fall below the minimum threshold of 15%. This will allow others to capture tax revenue that we otherwise could. Given our well-telegraphed future expenditure needs, this would be foolhardy. For these reasons, the Workers' Party supports the bill. Even so, some may caution that subscribing to a corporate minimum tax will erode some of the cornerstones of Singapore's global competitiveness, our attractiveness to foreign capital. In my speech, I will explain why such fears are probably misplaced and what we can do to avoid it. Sir, there is a standard refrain for those who believe that BEPS 2.0 will herald an unrecoverable erosion of our nation's competitive advantage. Absent low taxes, they say, we will be unable to attract the necessary investments from abroad, which in turn will leave us adrift. Now, if there were any truth to such a claim, it would perhaps have been applicable half a century ago. It is no secret that in Singapore, in our formative years as a nation, we did indeed rely heavily on attracting foreign direct investments via multinationals. This in turn hinged on factors such as attractive corporate incentives, including tax holidays for multinationals, which kept the effective company tax rate as low as 10%. Still, even a casual examination of statutory corporate tax rates would reveal that statutory rates were as high as 40% until the late 1980s. It was only later that they were more progressively reduced to 32% through the early 90s, then 26%, then to the 17% that prevails today. Whether this was a belated effort to chase the tail of low costs to sustain our competitive edge, or if it was driven by pressure from foreign businesses to keep rates attractive, I do not know. What I do know is my belief that we should already have evolved away from such unvarnished tax competition. The determinants of foreign direct investments are, after all, rich and varied. But there is only some mild indication that the corporate tax rate, whether statutory or effective, matters. Indeed, one study that summarized the extant evidence suggests that factors like market size, trade openness, and infrastructure quality are between 4 to 7 times more important. Another concluded that, and I quote, the effect that tax policy had on FDI was small compared to other factors, end quote, and that, quote again, tax policy cannot compensate for a negative investment climate, end quote. One important reason for this relatively muted effect of taxes on FDI is that sufficiently large multinational corporations will ultimately confront foreign taxes on their earnings when their profits are repatriated back to their home country anyway. This could even lead, paradoxically, to a situation where, depending on the tax regime of the home country, raising taxes may even stimulate more investment. Of course, tax treaties designed to mitigate this tax treaties designed to mitigate the effects of double taxation may blunt this effect somewhat. However, such treaties have often been found to have little effect on actual FDI flows. Such conditions are precisely what are being addressed by BEPS 2.0. The new regime targets large MNCs, many of which are already domiciled in higher tax regimes. While these home countries can now officially apply a top-up tax, many firms would have faced such taxes, higher taxes anyway, when profits were eventually booked at home for redistribution to shareholders. Furthermore, even compared to our ASEAN neighbors, a corporate tax rate at the 15% minimum remains below the regional average of a little more than 20%. Hence, my sense is that while BEPS 2.0 may hurt at the margin, it is far from being game-changing. The bottom line, sir, is simple. As a high-income economy, Singapore's attractiveness as an investment destination is not, and should not be, fundamentally reliant on low corporate taxes, but not all the other things that set us apart. Lest one takes this as an idiosyncratic opinion, I should stress that this isn't just my own conclusion. According to the World Competitiveness Report, Singapore owes its competitiveness landscape more to our efficient labour market, openness to international trade and investment, and educational and technological infrastructure, all of which we rank in the top 3 globally, other than our tax policy, where we place 10th. Similarly, our score on the Global Competitiveness Report is due more to our country's transport and utility infrastructure, sophisticated and stable financial system, and quality of institutions, as opposed to low taxes. The reality is that our competitiveness is not anchored in low taxes and is also reflected in real-world investment advisory. PwC, the corporate advisory, lists in a 2022 report 10 factors that make Singapore the best in class in the region. And none of these 10 are about taxes per se. To the extent that taxes were featured at all, it was in the context of double taxation agreements, which I agree should continue to be a priority for IRAS. Mr. Speaker, in addition to not bluntly competing for foreign capital inflows along the corporate tax margin, we should also be mindful that, given our status as a high-income country, we shouldn't be blindly courting capital either. This isn't to say that foreign investment isn't important. Rather, it is that we should pursue FDI more for its secondary benefits rather than for the financing itself. Singapore is already a capital-rich economy. Where we have fallen short, rather, has been in bringing our levels of productivity and innovative capacity to the global frontier. What should instead become ever more important is a focus on evaluating the efficiency of our capital deployment and an upgrading of our technological capabilities. If that comes along with FDI, wonderful. But FDI shouldn't be the goal. The government has, for its part, made it clear that it plans to reinvest any excess revenue garnered from participation in BEPS 2.0 back into our economy to ensure competitiveness. I could not agree more. If we are not to expand our efforts in courting global capital, then what should we do instead? Well, we should reinvest as much as possible in the human capital of our people, of course, and as this will bring not only more bang for the buck, it also comes with improved productivity and innovation. Now, notwithstanding how money is ultimately fungible, this implies that we should nevertheless seriously consider earmarking the funds for R&D, education, or, as my Sengkang colleague will suggest later in his speech, healthcare. In prior interventions in this House, I had repeatedly emphasized the importance of placing investment in human capital on at least the same footing as that of physical capital. I suggested, for example, that funds targeted toward infrastructure development can and should be broadened to accommodate expenditure on training and education, or warned that those deigned for productivity improvements do not somehow get diverted toward yet more physical capital accumulation. Even in the most recent context of PM Wong's budget statement this year, I caution against the refundable investment credit scheme morphing into some kind of loophole for simply increasing production rather than R&D or green transition efforts. I will reiterate the appeal here that as we reinvest the proceeds from top-up taxes accruing from BEPS 2.0, we once again consciously channel these toward bolstering our intangible capital, the education and skills of our workers, to generate knowledge and ideas that will keep us at the forefront of the global competitiveness frontier. At risk of oversimplification, Mr. Speaker, let me offer an analogy to the points I'm making. We can think of tax rates as parking fees one pays to access a mall. Sure, or else equal, one would probably choose a mall that charges less for parking or offers free parking for the first hour or two. But ultimately, we choose the mall we do because of the range of shops, the price of the goods that are sold there, the quality and service of its restaurants, and how pleasant the overall shopping experience is. Such thrusts should be the focus of our investment regime going forward. In future, we're likely to see more, not less, of such multilateral economic agreements led by the major economies. As frustrating as the lack of progress in carbon pricing worldwide has been, especially for those of us that are advocates of the approach, the go it first strategy of the EU in implementing its carbon border adjustment mechanism, it is heartening to see how unilateral approaches have nonetheless sparked complementary legislation in other jurisdictions. Similar progress has been made within the G20 on the rollout of a global wealth tax. The reality is, international agreements that used to sting as a result of difficulties associated with free riding are now finding renewed life via unilateral mechanisms by major players that better align the incentives of those that would previously have rankled at the prospect of such coordination. It behooves us to play to our nation's inherent advantages as they exist today and not as they used to be, as we navigate this changing global geoeconomic and political landscape. For this reason, we should, nay, we must, not only embrace the spirit of BEPS 2.0 for our economy, but proactively channel our energies toward refreshing our growth model toward the genuine drivers in the 21st century, our people and the knowledge that is embedded in them.